Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we talk about Xamarin with Lee Mallon from Rarely Impossible. So, full disclosure on this one, I've known Lee for around 16 years. We were in college together, and we also did the same computer science degree in university. And it's down to him, really, that I found my calling in programming. So a little bit of background on him as well is that Lee runs a mobile app agency called Rarely Impossible. They're a leading Xamarin Premier partner who work with companies across the world on international organisation, mobile strategy, and building UX line of business application using the Xamarin platform. So welcome to the Cynical Developer, Lee.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming on. So we'll get straight to it with what is Xamarin?
It is a monkey, but not in this sense. Xamarin is a way to write native mobile applications for a multitude of platforms using C#.
So you say that it's native. Is this a build once, run everywhere, or are you building directly to the platform?
So Xamarin is as native as Objective-C and Swift are, and as Java is on Android. There is, when it gets compiled down, there is no difference. There is no performance reduction. In fact, Xamarin is more performant than Objective-C. It loses out to Swift a little bit. On Android, pre-Android 5.0, Xamarin applications were faster than native Android apps as well. So Xamarin is built on top of Mono, which obviously has been mature for over 10 years now. And though you can write the majority of your logic in C# once, you still then have to build the separate projects for each platform and also the UIs that goes with them. Though there are some nice little frameworks within the Xamarin suite of products that can mitigate that. Though there are some conditions around when and how you should use them.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so that's something that I wasn't aware of, is that I was under the impression that it built down to some sort of intermediate language that was sort of transcoded and used some sort of communication with the APIs on the local device. I didn't realise that it actually compiled down to native code. Is that a new thing for Xamarin, or has it always been like?
No, it's always been that way. It always gets misconstrued to be compared with the likes of Cordova or Titanium, but it's always been a native compilation.
So you mentioned then a couple of the other ways of doing cross-platform. One of my first questions would have been, is it better than native? And you've already answered yes, it is. It's faster. So what are the benefits over doing it hybrid? So with like Apache Cordova, React Native, or just a thin application that's a HTML5 app?
So we've been using Xamarin for about 4 years now, and as a company. And originally, my answer was very much Xamarin's great. It is comparable to native. There's some situations where, from existing code bases and things that you might choose the Objective-C or Swift angle. And the same with the likes of Cordova and Ionic. From a kind of an Angular point of view, they're great for certain use cases as well. And React Native is kind of, I'd probably say, the most comparable to Xamarin, but it's still very new. It's not mature. There's still things it's several years behind to kind of catch up. But the conclusion I've come to recently is you should pick the language that you have the best team to perform on. So if you have a team of amazing JavaScript developers, they're going to build you an amazing app. If you have an amazing team of native developers, they're going to build you an amazing app. If you are a C# developer and have a web background or a Windows background and want to get into mobile development, then you'd be foolish not to at least give this a shot.
Right. Okay. So it's one of those questions of it depends. There isn't a great deal of difference with the platforms anymore. It's not the case of one's really horrible over the other one. They're all comparable.
They're all horrible. They're just all different levels of horrible. So it does depend. And over the last few years, the feature sets within them have kind of consolidated a bit now. So there's things you can do in certain platforms that are better than the others, and vice versa. Xamarin's been offering same-day support for the iOS and Android releases since iOS 6. And, that's kind of helped mitigate any of the concerns of getting stuff out on release day and worrying if it's going to get past the App Store approval process. But the thing to remember with all this stuff, especially with Xamarin, is Xamarin's built on Mono. Mono is monogame. Monogame is Unity. Any of the highest grossing apps on the App Store are built in Unity.
Right.
So if you can run Pokemon Go and make $500 million from it, I think it's good enough for anyone else.
Right. Okay. So that was a Unity project as well.
Yeah.
Cool. If I wanted to develop an app to target all three platforms, do I need a Windows box, a Linux box, a Mac box to actually target them, or can I do that all from Visual Studio?
So again, not as simple an answer, but if you want to build an iOS app, then you have to use a Mac to build it. That is a license agreement thing from Apple, though you don't necessarily have to have a Mac to do the development. So you could do that through, so in the last 4 months, Visual Studio has added remote debugging. So you could have a Mac on the network and then view the iOS simulator from Visual Studio on a PC. Or there are different services like Mac in the cloud. So you can have a Mac running on a VM in the cloud and you can build to it remotely whilst using your Windows machine. For Android, you can use whatever you want. You can use a Mac and use Xamarin Studio, or you could use Windows and use Visual Studio.
So you mentioned Xamarin Studio there. My experience has been that you build your Xamarin apps in Visual Studio. What is Xamarin Studio? Is it its own IDE? What's it about?
So Xamarin Studio is Xamarin's IDE. It was previously known as Mono Develop, and has in recent years moved into the Xamarin Studio, Xamarin suite of applications. Xamarin Studio can run on Windows or Mac, but it's not been developed any further on Windows anymore because the Visual Studio integration is so good now. But you can get it on Mac, and you can build any Xamarin project across them. And what's also quite good is you can use the project types for both. So if you had some developers working in Xamarin Studio and some on Visual Studio over the same repository, that would work fine. You wouldn't have any problems.
Right, so it works with the same solution and project files that Visual Studio does?
Yeah.
Cool.
That's it, seamlessly.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's good. With the different platforms, there's obviously different UI standards. So your menus are different. Your buttons have got to appear in a different place. On some platforms, they need to be down by your home button. Other ones, they need to be up at the top of the screen. Is it a big issue for you as a developer to sit and have to write your own controls to deal with that? So you have to look to see if you're on Android or if you're on Windows or you're on iOS, and actually say, well, use this view or use this view to deal with that.
Yeah. So in Xamarin, the structure of a Xamarin application is like any Visual Studio project. So you can have your business logic in a PCL, portable class library, and you can share it across the Android and iOS projects and just inject it in. Or you can use shared code where it just does file injection. With Xamarin, you have 100% coverage of both iOS and Android APIs. So anything you can do in iOS, around UIKit, System IO, Core Graphics, Core Motion, MapKit, as well as stuff that's in C# like Link, XML, numerics, service model. You get all of that on both platforms, which means that you can build that into your core PCL package where all your service logic happens. But you then need to make the UI platform specific. So Android XML and storyboarding on iOS, and then you basically wire up your UI to your shared code base. So you'll typically get around at least 70% code reusage across both platforms, but you then have to do the UI yourself, which, though is less code usage, is the most time-consuming thing. but you then get control, so you can start placing things in the right place, especially if you're working to different screen resolution, screen dynamics, tablets, phones, watches, and smart devices as well.
Is that covered with Xamarin Forms, or has that name been dropped?
So Xamarin Forms is something on top of that. So if you want to... Xamarin Forms came out about 2 years ago and was a way to unify the UI layer so that you could write one UI and build to 3 platforms, that being iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. What happened is over the last 2 years is Xamarin Form has become quite impressive in what it does. So you can now define a page. Xamarin Forms has a collection of about 40 controls, 5 page types, so master detail page, carousels, tab controllers, and then different page layouts. So absolute layouts, stacking, all these things will be quite familiar if you're a Windows developer. And from that, you can define how a page flows and how navigation flows once, and then Xamarin Forms will take that and wrap it and use the native behavior on both platforms. The easiest example is on iOS. If you have a tab page, your tabs sit nicely along the bottom, and you can navigate between them. And on Android, your tabs sit along the top. Whereas all you would have to do is add the tab page, and Xamarin Forms would process that and make the decision itself. From there, you're able to get between... We have applications in Xamarin Forms where we get 95 to 99% code reuse.
Nice. That's definitely a time saver if you're getting that sort of reuse out of it. We touched then on portable class libraries. Now we're going to be talking with Carl Schweitzer about UWP in the next episode, and I don't want to give too much away about UWP. But if I'm producing my code for Xamarin in portable class libraries, does that mean that I can take those libraries and stick them into a UWP app and use them in my Xamarin app?
Obviously you just got to be careful with what profiles you're targeting. So if you're deciding to support anything that is outside of the profile remit, but you can build for in Xamarin Forms, for example, you can build for iOS, Android, Windows Phone, UWP, and there is also a preview at the moment now for building Mac desktop apps as well.
Right, so you'd actually build your UWP app straight in the same project.
Yes, or you could.
Yeah,
or you could share the PCLs across. We've had projects where we have a core PCL where we share logic even between both iOS, Android, and the backend layer. And on some projects, we've managed to gain, like I mentioned, 90%. 95% code reusage between the mobile platforms, but we're able to save 30% of code between the mobile client and the server backend with things like helper methods and extension methods. And
you touched on OS development as well, OS X development or OS X, depends what you want to call it. That's coming to Xamarin as well, so this is almost a silver bullet for every platform you can think of.
Yeah, so you've always been able to build Mac desktop applications or Mac OS applications in Xamarin. But now the addition of adding that to Xamarin Forms completely just means that you can... To me, it feels like Xamarin are making a Silverlight that works, and that we're now in a multi-device world that needs that, where we weren't quite there kind of 6-7 years ago.
Sure. And I guess it fits with the way that .NET's going now. It's targeting every platform. You can run it everywhere, and having the technology for to actually building the applications is going to help massively with that as well.
Yeah, well, Microsoft's new tagline is any developer, any app, any platform.
Yeah, it's a very different Microsoft that we're seeing of late.
Yeah, well, and that is becoming more and more prevalent, especially with their commitment to open source and things.
You mentioned that anybody or any .NET developer should be able to pick this up. Is it a big barrier to entry, or is it something that I could sit down and over a couple of evenings or a couple of days just pick this up and actually start building something with it and have an application on my device?
Depends on how good a developer you are. No. So Xamarin, Xamarin as a platform used to be quite expensive if you weren't doing it for commercial purposes, and that was a massive barrier. That got dropped recently with the acquisition from Microsoft. At the same time, it also was open sourced. So all of Xamarin Forms is now open source. The only things that aren't are their designers. So inside of Visual Studio, you can obviously drag and drop your UI to build up your screens in Xamarin. That's the only bit they haven't open sourced because it's got some real IP within it.
Yeah.
So, but the open source nature of it is very good because it means that if you're stuck on something or you kind of wonder why they've done it a certain way, you can just dive into the code. For us, for example, where we do quite a lot of line of business stuff in Xamarin Forms now, Xamarin Forms has a great carousel view, but it only works well up to, say, 10 slides. And we have examples where we need like several hundred. So we were able to kind of look at the code, build our own, but base a lot of it on what was in there before and just optimize it. So its caching strategy was a lot better.
Is that something because it's obviously your business IP that you've kept to yourself, or is that something that's available on GitHub that you're looking to push back into the product?
It is a part of our core libraries, but we are early next year, we are looking to open source quite a few of the controls that we put together.
We talked then about Xamarin being very expensive up until the acquisition by Microsoft. What has that meant for Xamarin? Has it made it better? Has it made it worse? Has it made it future brighter than what it was? What has been the impact on that?
For us personally, like our customers are obviously quite happy because it means that it will be supported long term with Microsoft's kind of commitment behind it. I think for Microsoft in particular, it was an important need. Windows Phone is just getting less and less market share, and they needed something to project onto the mobile platforms. And Microsoft's new mantra of anywhere, mobile isn't going anywhere. And if you want to target 95% of the devices people use in the world now, you need a mobile platform. So for all the developers that are on the platform, for any companies that are using their technology, it has had this insertion now of commitment from Microsoft as an organization, which I think in the next 18 months, the adoption is just going to go through the roof, especially where people will start migrating more legacy systems because they now have a competent alternative solution that is not going to be worried if it's going to go anywhere.
There were some announcements made at Microsoft Connect to do with Xamarin. Are you able to sort of go into some details about what they were and what the future sort of holds for Xamarin now?
Yeah, so Xamarin has gone through, obviously the acquisition happened several months ago, at the same time with their Cycle 8 release. But Microsoft Connect, we also had. So Xamarin as a platform is not just the development tool. So Xamarin has a suite of applications that fit into the DevOps lifecycle, which we should probably talk through. So if I'm a mobile developer, you basically have develop, test, build, distribution, and monitor. So develop is your Visual Studio or your Xamarin Studio, or what was released at Microsoft Connect, Visual Studio for Mac as well.
Right.
And that's where you write your code and you get your applications working. Now, for those who aren't familiar with mobile development, fragmentation is a massive problem. In our office, we have 30 to 40 devices to test with, but it's laborious and it takes time. So Xamarin built a product, or they purchased a product actually, called Xamarin Test Cloud, which enables you to run automated UI tests similar to Selenium, if you're from a web background, where you can run them on physical devices at their data center in Denmark, and it will run your UI tests on them devices and then report back to you and screenshot the performance, so you can see how your application looks and performs to have the confidence that it's going to go out into the store in a state that you want your customers to see it. And then the build stage is obviously continuous building. So how do you get needing the things like Macs, needing the latest APIs from Android SDKs? What is your continuous build cycle? Things like Visual Studio Online enable you to do this. For us, we use a product called Bitrise, where you can just build into your workflow the building of it and the provisioning profiles and signing of keys. It works great. And that then things build on your merges into master, so you get a continuous deployment strategy. Microsoft recently purchased a product called Hockey App as well. Hockey App's an internal beta user platform, so you can get your applications in the hand of your users for them to test, to give you feedback, to identify any problems before you submit it to stores. And then once you do submit it to the store, the final piece of the puzzle is monitoring. Xamarin have Xamarin Insights, which until recently had been having a lot of new features added, but again, that's being deprecated and have that functionality merge into Hockey App, just so that Microsoft are now unifying a lot of their projects solutions into one place that everyone can find quite easily. And at Microsoft Connect this week, they released the Azure Mobile Center, which you can see is starting to pull all of these things now into a unified place that you can see them in Visual Studio, so you can build your application, test it on multiple devices, get it in the hand of users, and then be able to monitor both event tracking and audience analysis, as well as crash reporting.
So Microsoft are pushing a lot, towards Azure now. How does that link in with Xamarin?
Yeah, definitely. The Azure has some quite interesting things around Xamarin. So Azure has the Azure Mobile Services. So Mobile Services is a way to very quickly add a backend to your mobile application. So you could compare it to the likes of Parse or Firebase from Google. It's kind of like a database in the cloud without having to manage SQL Server and schemas yourselves. Now, you can do a lot of stuff with Azure Mobile Services, but Azure as a platform opens up even more. And there's loads of Xamarin SDKs within it. Sorry. The SDKs that are within it are covering iOS, Android, and Windows. And again, all of them are open sourced as well, which you can then obviously build on top of. They cover things from user authentication, push notifications, offline syncing as well, works quite well. And then you can bring them all together into the same package, again, using and sharing PCL helpers and code bases where it makes sense. There's a great sample project on the Xamarin GitHub it's under their dev days package, and it's to get the weather, and there's one for to-do tasks, which shows you how the Xamarin Sync works, and just kind of guides you through the process. Within the Azure platform, there's also some really nice newer services around cognitive search. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
The machine learning type stuff that is coming around now.
Yeah, so we built an application recently which would take a photo of you, and it can determine your happiness score. And then obviously you can take another picture, and then you can compare the two together. So facial recognition as well as audio. The cognitive search can pick up about 64 faces within a video. And again, all them things are really easy to do because they're on native SDKs that you can link into, which just makes it a dream to work with.
Right. And does that link into the Microsoft APIs that are online that you pay for on a process basis, or is it just a pure SDK and you have to teach it?
So that links into the cognitive. So the cognitive search is you are kind of off the shelf. You can put in an image of anything, and it will give you a score back. If you want to delve more into the Azure machine learning and the R stuff, then you have to get a bit more hands-on yourself. But you can build an application, and there are sample applications on the Xamarin GitHub repository using cognitive search, where you take a photo and it can identify you, and then obviously you can give it other photos to see if it can do a facial match.
Cool. That's good. That's really powerful, and it's very similar to a side project I was looking at not too long ago, but gave up on it because I couldn't find a decent resource for it. So maybe it's time to go back and have a look at that.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're looking to add things like push notifications, the Azure platform is great for that because it targets both the iOS one and the Google one and supports them in a unified way.
If I wanted to go and learn more about Xamarin and I wanted to start building my app, say I wanted to build an app for the podcast, are there any training courses? Are there any events or anything like that you could suggest? Any websites that are good to go and look at?
So Xamarin's main website has a lot of documentation on it. Their GitHub repo is full of loads of samples, both from the Xamarin side and from the Xamarin Forms side to get you started. The Xamarin have a program called Xamarin University. It is a paid-for program, but there is a 30-day trial still, which are both video tutorials, kind of like Pluralsight, but also live coaching sessions in small groups of people around the world with certified developers kind of teaching them. And then obviously at the end of Xamarin University, you can become certified as well, which obviously helps from a job point of view. And finally, Xamarin partner with hosts. We ran one today, actually, a Xamarin Developer Days, where community organizers just get people in a room and walk people through, like we've just done in this podcast, the benefits of Xamarin, and then do hands-on labs with people who are around to offer their expert advice to get people started.
Awesome. Just to summarize, really, what we've spoken about is that Xamarin is a tool for building multi-platform applications. There's a lot of add-ins and extras that you can use with it, such as Xamarin Forms, to make sure that you're abiding by all the UI standards that are forced on you by the providers. But the fact that it's now available for free in Visual Studio, I think that's a big thing for the likes of myself, who are not doing mobile development on a corporate scale, but maybe just want to have a look at it and a play around with it. The future's looking good for Microsoft in its open source pursuit as well, especially with Xamarin falling into that. Right, well, you've covered off everything really well. Opened my eyes a little bit to what's out there. I didn't realise it was such a big package and what you could actually achieve with it. So I think it's time to stop listening to the podcast and go out and actually get our hands dirty and build some mobile apps. So thanks very much for coming on.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Thanks, and we shall catch you all next time. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform and help the Cynical Developer to grow by increasing its audience. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website, where you can find all the resource links and show notes for each episode.